Hey, and welcome to the highlights of episode number 175 with Samantha Wills. Some of my favorite parts of this episode were when she shares her tips on how to build a tribe and why authenticity creates community. Plus, I also loved her take on how to cultivate work-life integration. But there is so much more wisdom and inspiration that you get in the full episode. So to listen to the full podcast and get all the info in the show notes, head on over to melissaambrosini.com/175 right now. Welcome, Samantha. I am so excited to have you on the show, a fellow Aussie. But before we dive in, can you take us back and tell us your story and how you got to where you are today with this global empire and how it all began?
Yeah, so I grew up in Port Macquarie, a very small town in the mid-north coast of Australia. And my mum put me in beading classes when I was 11 years old. And I think it was very much just to keep me out of trouble in the school holidays. It was like a little craft shop in my hometown, and it was $8 a lesson. And I really attribute learning kind of the basis of jewelry making back to then. My parents always had small businesses, and my mum had a boutique clothing store. And she would allow me to sell, little pieces of jewelry that I'd made on the counter there. And I was probably 12 years old by this stage and was, earning $50 or $60 a week from hand making jewelry. And throughout high school, I was making it for friends and things, and barely finished high school and didn't go to university, and moved to Sydney when I was about 20 years old. And in Sydney, I was just working a retail job and still doing jewelry as kind of a hobby, at night times. And friends would kind of come over and see the jewelry on the dining table and be like, oh, can I buy this? And I was like, oh, absolutely not a problem. And then they'd bring friends over and kind of started this almost organic jewelry party, I guess, kind of party plan kind of style where people would then host it in their home. So I'd kind of bring over this Tupperware full of handmade jewelry and lay it out on their dining tables. And they'd have 10 or 15 girlfriends over, and then 3 more people would book. And it really started this organic kind of party plan business. So I was working full-time through the day, doing the jewelry parties at night, hand making jewelry every other night. And then down at Bondi Beach Markets, which was still there today, but at the time it was very much a launch pad for Australian designers. And I took a stall down there every Sunday. So you'd kind of go down, it was a time before the internet, kind of online registrations. And so you'd line up at 3 o'clock in the morning down there, and to get the same market stall, so kind of, people would recognize that you're in the same spot every week. Do a full day down there. And then after doing all of this for about a year, a friend down at the markets had a showroom wall at Australian Fashion Week in 2004. And it was a time when they used to have the runways down the middle and kind of these trade shows around the outside of the tent. And he said, do you want to come down and try and get some retail orders? There was a spot on his showroom wall for $500. I think at the time I had $509 in my bank account. And I was like, hopefully I'll take the spot and hopefully get a bit of PR out of it or make one order back. And after the 4-day trade show down there, I had written $17,000 worth of orders, and was like, oh shit, like I've actually got to go and actually fulfill these orders that I've, handmade, and quit my retail job the next day. And, 22 years old, was like, okay, I'm going to start a jewelry company. And that was nearly 16 years ago.
Wow. Let's get practical. So there's a lot of people listening to this and they want to launch their dream business.
Mm-hmm.
How do they do it? Like, what were some of the first steps that you took to build your jewelry empire?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's a question that, in 2004 was very, very different to now in a lot of ways. Obviously social media now, it just wasn't a thing back then. But I think, I think the biggest key things for me, if I was to start a new brand tomorrow, I think the most important thing is knowing your why. And, Simon Sinek talks often about people don't purchase what you do, they purchase why you do it. And I think that the best brands, product is secondary, I believe. Anyone can do a good product. And if you're in business, you should have a good product. But it's about the ability to emotionally connect that with a consumer. And that is done through storytelling. Really owning your story and owning the authenticity of your story, because people can copy product and they can copy packaging, but your story is your story and that's what sets you apart. And I think the other really important thing is defining your own personal values. I think that's, your personal brand is your highest currency that you'll ever have. And if you know your own personal values, that is a huge investment, I think, across any type of work, whether it's your own brand or, a career working in other brands and businesses. That is a really good, I think, gauge to see where you're at and how your personal brand translates. And I think if you're going into launching your own brand, another thing I like to say to people is stand for something. It's kind of, the world doesn't need another product that kind of has nothing to say. I think there is such power and such a need, especially for women in business, to stand for something or fall for anything is kind of how I put it. And the world needs more of opinion and it needs integrity around kind of that authenticity of people standing for something, because that is how communities are formed. And I believe that, we don't need any more product that is simply just a product, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So can you share your why with us?
Well, I loved being creative. I didn't love jewelry. I didn't get into it because I loved jewelry. I got into it because I love branding and I wanted to create a brand that people wanted to be a part of. And, I'd kind of get on, the internet at the time and look at these brands' websites. And at the time, people might update their website once a year. And I'd go on to brands that I really loved and try and find more about them, but there just wasn't a lot to kind of dig through. And I thought if I kind of wanted to create a brand that provided these layers that people could kind of lose themselves in a way, and something that, communicating that message. And, over time, it led to now the Samantha Wills Foundation, which is a foundation that I started to empower women in business. But my why was very much around a brand that women wanted to be a part of and a brand that was kind. And I think in the fashion industry, there's a stigma that fashion is very divisive and kind of almost has this elusive bitchiness to it, I guess. And I really wanted to have a brand that people felt very welcomed to be a part of, whether they're talking to me personally, whether they're talking to our customer experience team, when they get the product, how it makes them feel, and something that they really wanted to be a part of. So the last 16 years has been building different layers at different times around that message.
Beautiful. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Samantha Wills Foundation?
Yeah, so I launched it in 2016, and it was very much, I launched it because I looked back. I was doing a lot of public speaking around small business and entrepreneurs, and very graciously people were waiting to speak to me after the event and kind of lining up to ask questions and things. And I found that the lines were getting so long, but everyone was asking similar questions. So I was trying to get through the line and not really giving people the integrity and the time of answer that I would have liked to, but because everyone was asking similar questions, I was like, if I could get a platform where I can give this integrity of answer. And small business is, 24/7. It's not 9 to 5. And I looked back when I was 21 and, I was up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning making jewelry, and you feel like you're the only one in the world awake at times. And it can be so isolating and so daunting. I thought if I had something back then that I could log into at any hour of the day and know that I'm not alone in this process, and whether that's sharing my story and things I've learned along the way, whether it's interviewing other women in business and, highlighting and spotlighting their journey. And the one thing that I really wanted to do with it, I was like, we don't need any more overnight, glamorous success stories and, this polished, rags to riches kind of story. The prerequisite to get featured on the Samantha Wills Foundation is, share your vulnerabilities and what are the hurdles and what has been your hardest moment, and, why do you cry in the shower? What makes you show up the next day? And I think that is where you get community and connection, and everyone's going through the same shit. It's just no one's really kind of talking about it. So I wanted to create a platform that really brings together women speaking about their vulnerabilities and how we can help each other through that journey.
What are your tips or what is your advice on building a tribe and community?
Well, I wanted to create a brand people wanted to be a part of. It really was an organic growth. So if I look back on, I guess, what the key success factors in that were is obviously authenticity, and it's such an overused word, I think, in branding and marketing these days. But kind of going back to what I said before, like your story is the thing that no one else can copy. And I think just to segue for a second, my biggest mistake was I moved to New York to expand the business in North America when I was 28 years old. And at the time, it was around 2008, and the brand in Australia was booming. We were known very much for our bohemian aesthetic. It was about oversized, turquoise and these big chunky stones, and it was burnished metals, and it was layering, and it was this really kind of grassroots message of, this underdog story from the story I told before, from Port Macquarie to Bondi Markets and to now New York. And went over to New York and kind of got very romanced by, everything that is the creative industry in New York and kind of these beautiful heritage brands. And so I was talking to, brand advisors and things on the ground over there. And they're like, you need to do this, and you need to do shiny metals. You need to do more petite styles. And, it's not bohemian over here. It's more chic. And so I kind of took everything that was authentic and successful about the brand, and in one season literally turned it around. And I literally turned it on its head within one season. And it very near bankrupted us within one collection. And it was such a wake-up call to me to really sit myself down in front of the mirror and look myself in my own eyes. And like I said before, going back to the why and why I started this. And the authenticity is what creates community. And if you're authentic in what you do and you're consistent with your message, you'll naturally attract like-minded people. But if you're kind of going into it trying to be something that you're not, it's confusing to people, and you're going to kind of attract people who are not loyal followers in a way. They might be like, oh, I like your message this season, but then it's not consistent the next, so they kind of drop off. So it's a very long way to answer your question around community, but I believe it's through authenticity and being very clear with your messaging, and that creates, a community of like-minded people.
Now, you recently announced that you're closing down Samantha Wills Jewelry. Now, some people might look at you and think, you are crazy for walking away from this. And I'm sure you've probably got that. Can you tell us about that decision to walk away? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's the biggest decision I've ever made in my life, but it was the calmest decision that I've ever made. And yeah, it's really still surreal. So we're trading through till January 2019. So we kind of announced it with 6 months to close. And I think the question I've been asked most, I think, is why aren't you selling rather than just closing? For me, ever so modestly naming the brand after myself all those years ago, I just didn't have the heart to kind of hand the brand over to a new owner and to kind of just sit by and see what happened to the brand. That was my main reason for not selling. And I think the reason for closing is it just felt like the right time. We'd kind of said everything that I wanted to say with the brand. And I kind of refer it to the Seinfeld model, where it's kind of going out on a high rather than waiting till you kind of, run it into its last legs. And I believe that, we've always been a brand with something to say, and we've done so with integrity. And I really wanted to honor that legacy by kind of, time capsuling it into a 15-year journey. And I think the big thing in decision making at any level, but I think at a crossroads like that, which was a very significant one for me, is getting out of your head and into your heart. And what I mean by that is, like, if you're using the word, oh, I think this, or, I think that, it's like, but how do you feel about it? And I think differentiating between how you think and how you feel is a really powerful way to make decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are you going to focus on now? The Samantha Wills Foundation, is that the direction that you want to go in next and really focus all of your energy and attention on that? Or is there something else as well?
The Samantha Wills Foundation definitely will be a focus. I'm writing a lot at the moment, so I've got a few books in me, I hope, of, sharing stories over the last 15 years and what I've learned in that time, and also paralleling kind of the public persona of the brand versus the personal aspect of it, because I think, young female entrepreneurs, and when I say young, I mean young in the entrepreneur journey, not so much young in age. It's all about integrating a business with your lifestyle, and that comes at a cost on both ends. So really trying to put a voice to the realities behind that. And that will be, through the foundation, through a lot of public speaking, and through hopefully writing some books.
Oh, so exciting. Now, for someone listening, I would love that is starting a business. I would love to hear your biggest business lessons or any words of wisdom for anyone who is starting out.
I mean, if you're starting a brand, obviously we've spoken about community, but I think community is such an important part of business, and it's with community that you can evoke change. So I think, really focusing on what your messaging is and how you can consistently tell that. I think another, word of advice that I would say that from lessons that I've learned over time is, as the brand founder, be the first to put your hand up when the brand makes a mistake. Don't wait to be called out on it. I think there's a real power in that. And the other thing I like, we do a program, and we have done for about 10 years in the Samantha Wills business, called Surprise and Delight. And it was very much a no purpose generosity program. So it wasn't about, a gift we purchase, or, rewarding the highest spender, which we do in different ways. But it was very much about, if you've got some products in the office, and just surprising someone for absolutely no reason at all. So kind of that, kindness and generosity for no reason. And the impact that we found that had was so long lasting, and selfishly so, it's that, giver's high, where you get that real kick out of, bringing kindness to someone. So, looking at ways to incorporate kindness into your business and your brand, I think go a really long way.
Such a nice reminder. So I'm a big believer in, you spoke about it before, when you're in startup or a small business or an entrepreneur, you're working 24/7. You never really switch off. And I don't really believe in this work-life balance. It's kind of like this integration, because it all kind of meshes into one. But how do you make sure that you have a nice flow between work and life? Like, how do you make sure that you stay balanced within yourself, so that, you're not all work and you're not all chilling on the beach? How do you make that integration for you?
But I don't know if I'm the right person to ask this question, but I think there's no set way. I think it's very individual to what is important to you in life. And I think, I said at the start, knowing what your personal values are, but I think also knowing what success looks like to you. And that could be financial, that could be travel, that could be time off. And I think we're in a stage in society at the moment where people are really valuing their health over wealth in a way that is really important to find what that stability is. And I think it's really, it's a very top level to be like work-life balance, because I don't think it really does exist in that traditional sense, especially in startup. But my advice over the years is, the more that I've traveled, I've tried to push work and life closer together rather than try to separate them. I think when you're trying to separate them, it puts a huge stress on both of them. But, really trying to integrate technology, and trying to, if you're traveling for work, add 2 or 3 days on one end of the trip and have some time off, and really enforcing that downtime, I think is really hard to do, and it's really important.
Can you share with us some of your boundaries? Like, do you have boundaries around email and your phone and Instagram? What are some boundaries that you've put in place that have really, allowed you to thrive?
Yeah, and it's changed over the years. I think the ones at the moment for me is definitely less time on social media. You said before, it is the highlight reel, and Instagram specifically that we're talking about. But I think my kind of rule at the moment is, however much time you spend on social media, you need to spend double that time reading, and reading offline. I mean, whether it's a book or, Kindle, not reading social media. And if you can't find the time to do that, then you need to cut down the foremost social media time, because it's such a rabbit hole. And I just think it does things to our mind that just take us on these journeys that aren't healthy. And then you kind of, look up and you've been on your phone for an hour, and it's so dangerous. But it's a habit that we're not even, aware that we're in. So that's been a lot for me to unwind that habit and really step back from that. But I'm a much better headspace when I'm on social media less.
So, do you have any advice on how to cultivate beautiful relationships? Like, any relationship tips or advice?
I think, like I said before, the ability to really listen and not just wait for your turn to talk is a very rare trait. I think, being aware of your energy and of the energy that you surround yourself with is when you bring real awareness to that. I think energy is everything. And, I often talk as an example, how you show up to get your coffee in the morning. If you show up with, a bad attitude, and then that then passes on to the barista, then the barista's, meeting with another 400 coffee getters that morning, then they're meeting with at least 10 other people. And it's this passing of energy that, is this greater consciousness. So I think if we bring that down to our relationships and kind of that micro, I think that's a really important one, and to bring awareness to that and to show up, with a responsibility of good energy, because then you get it back. And I think that is a really good basis for a relationship.